So who do you think should be the next James Bond? That's a question Jeff Bezos recently asked his followers. And if you're wondering why he wants to know, well, it's because the tech billionaire recently acquired control of 007's fate. Today on Commotion, what the new Amazon deal means for James Bond. I'm Rad Simon Pillay, sitting in for Elamin Abdelmahmoud. This is Commotion. Okay, so I think the perfect place to start is right here. So James Bond is entering his prime delivery era. And that's because last week, Amazon MGM Studios revealed that they had acquired creative control of this iconic spy franchise. The descendants of the film's original producer, Albert Broccoli, they decided that after more than 60 years, they were going to be taking a step back. And we don't know all the terms of this new deal, but what we do know is that Amazon will now decide who plays Bond, who's going to be writing the scripts, and how much content is going to be shaken out of this beloved franchise. And for what that might look like, we're joined by two of my favorite Bond villains, Adam Naiman and Hannah Flint. Hello, y'all.
Morning.
Hello.
Hello. Adam, let's kick things off with you. What was your reaction to this news?
That we can't have nice things, or that Amazon can have nice things. Jeff Bezos can have nice things. We can't have them anymore. And you just think about how everything is intellectual property, and you sort of think about the difference between like custodians and slumlords, you know? And Amazon are slumlords with stuff like this. So it's not an optimistic feeling seeing this franchise. Whatever you think of Bond and how it's been steered over the years and all the decisions that go into each individual movie and the character overall, you just don't have a ton of faith that this is like a positive move.
Right. So the most cynical take we could imagine right now. But Hannah, I want to pose this to you, Hannah, because Bond is arguably the most British of all franchises, and the reaction over on your side of the pond to this news is that he's been lost to the Americans. It's like James Bond has defected. What's your reaction to that reaction?
Over here it's the Britain's biggest loss to America since 1776, right? It's like, oh my God, we lost the colonies. That's what it feels like over here. There's so much protectiveness. And actually today I was looking at a YouGov poll, who often do these polling of the British public. They asked, do you think that Amazon MGM having creative control is good or bad for the franchise? And 34% of adults said it would be bad for the franchise. 8% thought it would be good for the franchise. So the British have spoken.
Yeah.
That doesn't include the 24 and the 34% you're like, eh.
Right. Well, so everyone seems to have this very pessimistic view, and rightly so. But Adam, before we talk about what could change for the Bond franchise, let's talk about how things were. What is it about the Broccoli's family control of this franchise that made this so unique?
Well, they're so close to the material. And, generationally, they had success with it in real time. They shepherded it through so many shifts in how movies are made and exhibited and distributed. The Bond movie was sort of a franchise before franchising was common. Serials have always existed in literature and TV and cinema too. But Bond was sort of a prototype for what an event movie looks like. And James Bond returning is something that you kind of get used to. They oversee that through the 60s, through the 70s, the incredible changes in the 80s through home video, the postmodernism of the 90s, the turn of the millennium, huge shifts in British culture and global culture around that. They're overseeing that. And I think they did it with real affection and knowledge and a kind of arm's length of everybody else. They always said, we kind of know what's best for the character. In artistic terms, that's always debatable. Everyone has the Bond movies they like and the ones they don't. In commercial terms, it's kind of always succeeded. And I think commercial and art is very closely entwined with Bond because it's a commercial franchise. It's meant to be entertaining. There is an if it ain't broke, don't fix it aspect to this. So the fact that they've now turned around and been not it's broken, but we're out, it's a surprise, which is why people are covering it like this. And it's frustrating.
Well, then, but talking about their control and how close they are to the material and shepherding it over the years, how did you see that showing up on the screen in terms of what we saw?
Well, I think you see it showing up in the screen in that the movies feel self-contained, that they didn't rush them. They would take time between them, so people's appetites would kind of be whetted for it. They would take a lot of care with casting. Their casting instincts almost always correct, a little bit of missteps. But in retrospect, almost everyone has some affection in some way for one of those Bonds, you know? and they always kind of like touched on other trends like science fiction or the way movies were dealing with the fall of the Soviet Union or the fall of the Berlin Wall. Like they touched on those things, but they had such a good sense of what that universe looked like, and they never made it too much like anything else, while still picking and choosing very selectively from larger, well of pop culture. And again, that has to do with screenwriters and with directors and whatever else, but they were the ones hiring and making those decisions and cultivating that talent. And they talked about it very passionately over the years as kind of a family business. All the old Hollywood studios used to be a family business. Now they're not. They kind of still were.
Yeah. And I mean, in terms of like responding to the times, I mean, you see how Moonraker responds to Star Wars,
Sure.
but also like how the Daniel Craig Bonds respond to post 9/11 in that moment and everything.
Yeah, sorry, go on.
Yeah, no, I was. Yeah.
I mean, the Daniel Craig Bonds are like the real feather in their cap recently, because their instinct to how to reinvent that by kind of going back to the well and making something old-fashioned, but again, keeping up with the geopolitical reality, like that's some of the strongest stuff predatorially that they did, which is why it's so surprising that they're out.
Yeah. Well, Hannah, I mean, what about you? Like, what do you think that the Broccoli family did really well by this franchise?
I mean, well, copy and paste everything Adam said, but I also think they understood that whoever they cast as Bond can never be bigger than the brand when they first start out. So you kind of didn't really, I mean, I know now I was like Sean Connery, Pierce Brosnan, John Lazenby. No, I just. But there was something about picking the character, and then also I think is understanding the actor and suiting it to. I mean, I always think it's interesting how everyone gets so mad at the idea of changing Bond to a different ethnicity. But Bond in the books wasn't originally Scottish. They had Ian Fleming changed it once he saw Sean Connery in the role, right? And I think that's what they also done in that the way they, bringing Judi Dench in to take over as that wasn't like a gendered, oh my God, feminine. It was just like a made flipping sense thing because it's Dame Judi Dench, who of course she would run the MI6. Like that makes so much sense to me. And then even when they brought in like a bit more diversity in certain places where it wasn't just, as well, they kind of adapted where the femme fatale wasn't just there to be shagged by Bond. There was a bit more to it. And I think that's what they really understood. It wasn't calcified in this one belief. It was kind of like, how do we recognize not just the kind of geopolitical things, but also the kind of social things going on at the time and what people want to see on screen and want to see a bit more variety on there to make him still relevant.
Well, I mean, look, you're talking about like casting Bond and how they were so genius about it. And oftentimes they weren't like kowtowing to what people wanted. They upset people. Like Daniel Craig was like too short, too blonde, too blue-eyed, right? But I mean, of course, like no, Jeff Bezos, he did ask this question. This is Amazon's executive chairman asked his followers who should be the new Bond. But let's set that question aside for a second, and we will get to that. But what do you think, Adam, what do you think is going to be the biggest change now with Bond in the Amazon era?
It's more of the potential dread or horror of expanding this universe, Are they going to give, Moneypenny the early years? Are they going to do, the Penguin but about Goldfinger? And it sounds dumb to say it, but this is the way that everything bends now, which is bleeding as much as you can from this stone, from this property. And because of all the control they have top down, like they're a movie studio, but they're, a broadcaster and they're a streaming company, it becomes about content. And I think that one way to talk about the Bond movies is even if you have a hard time taking them as art, they were never quite content. And the way that everything now kind of reduces to content and is conceived that way, I guess maybe because Bond resisted it for so long, it feels kind of insulting. You think about the major franchises that have moved to the streaming realm and how their specialness has been just completely dissipated, like Lord of the Rings, which happens to be on Amazon, or you think about Star Wars, where whatever you think of those shows, there's so many of them now that none of them feel special. Right. So losing that feeling that every 5 or 6 years there's going to be a Bond movie, and they've obviously worked on it for a while, it's going to be pretty good, it's going to be worth seeing, that's almost certainly going to disappear. Even if they don't bulldoze it right away, that won't last.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Hannah, like same question to you in terms and responding obviously to what Adam's saying. Like, what are you seeing as what's going to happen with Amazon under control?
Yeah, I think we're going to get a lot of YA series. Like, I mean, look, if they want to do a spin-off series of Famke Janssen's like character from GoldenEye, hey, look, I won't say no.
It's not like we're not watching.
Hey, look, like I mean, she nearly killed him with her thighs.
Yeah.
That deserves a whole series on training for that moment. What I think is interesting though is just to kind of like go back and kind of come into it. It's like one of the things that made Bond special was the song. Do you remember like that was an event? I mean, it's been won so many Oscars for that song. Can you imagine like how many Bond songs we might have at this point? Like a Spotify playlist, like there's too much, you know? I think that's a really weird thing. I also wonder if it's interesting we were talking about earlier family business and, MGM obviously had the rights to the Bond franchise. They were bought by Amazon, and it meant like a lot of the creative output, people in that kind of studio were gone. So it feels like who's going to be making the decisions? I feel like at the time we're in the now, and there's a lot of pushback when we have like what's going on at Disney and stuff about Trump coming in appeasements and changing things. I worry that we might have a kind of, a regression, certainly what it might mean for what Bond is now, going back to traditional sort of Bond values. I mean, I hope not, but you never know.
Right. Well, then, I mean, let's get to the question that we've kind of been putting off. Like, Adam, like, one of the things that's never changed is that people for the past 60 years, they have been speculating, like, who is going to play the next James Bond, whether though their speculation pans out or not. So humor me, like, who would you like to see in this kind of role?
Mr. Beast. No, I'm kidding. I mean, I think that they're probably smart enough to at least continue that trend of, as was said, not picking someone who's too big for the role. There were rumors for so long about Tom Hardy doing it or Idris Elba doing it, and there's like a fantasy aspect to that because they're great movie stars. But again, they would kind of be past that role. So I think that they'll probably be very smart. They will turn that idea. I mean, I wouldn't put it past them to turn it into a reality show of finding the new Bond and sort of turning that almost into, like a kind of pre-content stream. But I think that it's probably not someone who people are speculating about already. And I'll stick with Mr. Beast because if Bond's going to be ruined, they might as well just go full into the YouTube influencer streamer. Cast one of the Paul kids as James Bond. Something terrible like that.
Yeah. I mean, like the way the TikTok influencers are and entering into these franchises, you could totally see. And that's the thing. I mean, you're talking about great care given. They'll probably have great care, but that kind of thing then dissipates as these kind of content forms continue. But Hannah, like, I mean, you talk to me, like, who would you love to see in this role in going forward?
Yeah, I've thought about this a lot. And it actually, I think, going back to how like Bond can shape to the actor. And I think one of the things we don't get a lot of in the UK is like British South Asian representation in kind of great roles, apart from like Riz Ahmed or Dev Patel. And I once interviewed Dev Patel and I was like, would you play Bond? He was like, I'd rather do a Bond villain. I was like, okay, cool. So in my head, like, given the history of like, it's so much about Bond and the private schools and the kind of imperialism, the legacy of colonialism. I would love to get like an Indian actor like Rahul Kohli, who you might have seen in like, Midnight Mass. And, he was in the TV series, this zombie series as well. But he's such a great actor who I feel is not too big for the brand. He's got kind of like recognition in America. And I think it'd be a really interesting kind of narrative about what it means to have like an Indian actor in that role and what it means to be like a tool of the kind of imperial government and how that works around the world. So that's my thought. And then Dev Patel as bad guy. There we go.
There you go.
Amazon, I'm here.
Okay. Bring those monkey man skills to Bond. I love it. Listen, so we got to leave it there, but thank you so much for both of you for being here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Hannah Flint is a freelance TV and movie critic. She's in London, England. Adam Naiman is a film critic in Toronto. He's here with me now in studio. I'm Rad Simon Play, sitting in for Elamin Abdelmahmoud. This is Commotion. Okay, so look, Korea has become a cultural powerhouse, okay? Like, you got K-pop artists touring sold out arenas. You got millions tuning in to watch shows like Squid Game. I mean, there is global demand for Korean content. But China is a special case because there's an unofficial ban on Korean movies and music and other cultural products in China. And these restrictions, they started in 2017 and were reportedly in response to South Korea's installation of an American missile defense system. But after about 8 years and an increasingly rocky relationship with the United States, there's reports that China could reverse that ban. And to help us unpack all this, we got Michelle Cho here. Hi, Michelle.
Hey, nice to be here.
Thanks for being here. Look, Michelle, we started hearing about this culture ban being lifted last week. What was the immediate impact of those reports?
So the immediate response was a bump in stock prices
Mm.
for K-pop management companies. I would say we saw the most impact in uh, content production companies that have been responsible for really big Netflix hits. And then also in K-pop management companies like Hybe, which is the parent company of BTS, their stock prices went up like, 5% or so. But probably the biggest gains were with these K-drama production houses. They went up almost 30%. So I think this kind of shows that there's a lot of speculation in the industry about, just how much potential growth the Chinese market represents. And so that's really what we're seeing in these bumps. We haven't seen as much of the kind of public's response to this news quite yet because it's all sort of projected to be happening in the next several months.
Hmm. Well, I mean, here's the thing. Like, China has never actually officially acknowledged that this cultural ban on Korean entertainment products even exists. So
Right.
how does that even like kind of how does it work and what does it look like in China?
Yeah. So there's this, pretty formal process for any content that's being imported into China or any performers that are seeking to put on shows or tour around the country. And that approval is given basically by the state. And so that approval was pretty routine all through the 2010s before this ban was put in place. But then all of a sudden, these approvals were denied. And there's really just no way to get around that at that point. You cannot distribute content. You cannot come into the country to tour.
Mm. Well, look, I mean, like this is a band that was reportedly started in 2017, and when that happened, like how big of a blow was that to Korean cultural industries at that time?
It was really significant. There have been kind of analyses done of what the kind of magnitude of the loss was at that time. And it's estimated to be about 22 trillion won or 15 billion US dollars of losses in sunk costs and lost revenues. Basically, all throughout the 2010s, there was this like concerted effort on the part of Korean media producers to integrate with the Chinese mediascape and to build up these partnerships. There are a bunch of co-productions, a lot of knowledge sharing. There were like shared investments in VFX. And there was this really, like a surge of development within the Korean film industry and TV production in particular because there was Chinese capital pouring in.
Mm.
And so like in 2014, the most popular television show in China was a Korean show.
Mm.
And so that is kind of there was a huge footprint that Korean media had that suddenly just like disappeared overnight or was pushed into the realm of like piracy and, this kind of unsanctioned consumption.
Right. Well, then, because if you think about the years since then, right, you think about like how Korean film, TV, music, how it's been surging in the West, and I'm thinking of like
Mhm.
K-pop groups like BTS and Blackpink and Stray Kids. Like whenever they drop a new album, new music, they're always on the Billboard charts. Or you think about how like Parasite won Best Picture at the Oscars
Yeah.
5 years ago, right? So, do you think that that was sort of a strategic move to sort of focus on North American audiences? Once the Chinese market had closed to South Korea, or is that just a coincidence?
Mm. Okay, so I feel like I have to say it's a little bit of both in the
Mm.
sense that I don't think that we can attribute like BTS's crossover success in North America just to trade strategy because, it's really hard to engineer that kind of, massive appeal. But also, I think that, the like Korean media industries have been seeking international audiences all around for decades. And so I think that it was maybe less a pivot, but more just the realization that one door had been like slammed shut. So they had to kind of shift to really focusing their attention on these other markets. But I will say that in the kind of TV or streaming space, Netflix's major partnership with Korean media producers starts after this ban. It's
Mm.
like it's around 2017, 18 that you see, Netflix original content in the streaming series kind of arena. And then that really explodes. So that is a very intentional pivot. And I think that, that will probably continue. So this reopening in China will not necessarily lead to another pendulum swing, I think.
So then, like, now that this cultural ban could be lifted, and experts, the experts are basically, they're calling this, and I'm going to quote, smile diplomacy, which are clearly words I've never said before. What does that, what does that mean?
I know, like, what's the opposite of smile diplomacy? Scowl diplomacy, I guess.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. Maybe that's like what we're seeing happening in the US, with what, the American, like Trump's administration is doing at this point. I mean, smile diplomacy, it kind of makes intuitive sense, right? You're like trying to cultivate, diplomacy is always about negotiating, what's in the best interests of like the party that is trying to make these connections or relationships. And so in this case, it's offering, economic incentives to develop friendly relationships to kind of soften the image of China as this kind of isolated, inward looking and, unfriendly, uncooperative kind of neighbor for South Korea. So I think that, yeah, it's not about highlighting hard power differentials and through that kind of coercing the other party into doing what you want. It's actually trying to be offering some sort of, some incentives, a hand, held out for partnership.
Well, so then, like, I mean, how do these latest developments then, what would they mean for China's relationship with the United States?
I mean, that is like, I think on everyone's mind, this is basically the issue that has people kind of speculating about what led to this shift in policy. Because again, it's like kind of a 180, right? I think that there's a sign, like we can read into this news, the fact that the rest of the world is really ready and pretty nimble to kind of shift gears or to come in and take advantage of the opportunity that's been created by the U.S. kind of changing decades-long relationships with other international entities.
Well, I mean, so then what is reversing this ban? What would it actually mean for like China's domestic entertainment industry?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose that like, cultural producers in China might view this a little bit negatively because it would, increase competition. Like I was saying, back in 2014, there was all of this consternation about this like hugely popular show and how much market share the Korean industries were taking in China. And so I think producers felt that they had a really hard time competing. But also, on the other hand, I think that there's a lot of potential in kind of, Chinese media producers having to also think about stretching their audience expectations so that they could also think about exporting content. Like if this is going to be a two-way flow, then that allows them to take on kind of new and maybe interesting topics and themes. I mean, it really offers, it stretches the boundaries, I think,
Right.
of what they might be able to take on.
Yeah. Okay. So, and I think that show you're talking about was called My Love for My Show for Love or something. Yeah. Sorry.
My Love from the
My Love
Star.
There,
Yeah,
yeah. There you go.
Yeah.
Listen, I just 20 seconds left, but I really want to
Sure.
ask you. I mean, you were talking a couple weeks ago about soft power, and I want to know, like, what is the impact of opening these cultural borders to Korea? What does that mean for the relationship between the people of China and South Korea? But like, just 20 seconds.
Yes. I'll very quickly. I mean, I had said at that point a couple weeks ago that I was skeptical about the idea of soft power, but in this case, I think it's really meaningful because as Korea and China kind of get closer together, that means, of course, that they are going to be shifting the geopolitical dynamic there. It really is this triangulated situation where South Korea is moving closer to China, maybe further from the US, with all of this change that's happening globally right now.
Okay. Amazing. Well, Michelle, thank you so much for being here with me and talking to me about this.
It's great to be here. Thanks.
Michelle Cho is a professor with the Department of East Asian Studies at the University of Toronto. She was responding to reports that China could soon lift its de facto ban on South Korean music, movies, and other entertainment products. And that's it for Commotion today. I'm Rad Simon Pillay, sitting in for Elamin Abdelmahmoud. Elamin is back tomorrow, so thanks for listening.